In the night. It's great to be with you all today.
Welcome.
To present Senate Bill 841. It's actually a bill that will help put money back into the state's transportation trust fund, I think, long term, which will be great. I'd like to present this legislation. What we're seeking to do as we look at how we pay for, fund transportation, and how our taxpayers are burdened by how we do that. This bill would seek to restore transportation equity between the users of roads and those that use public transportation. Also seeks to protect the privacy of our constituents. This legislation includes three main items. One, it would repeal, beginning in 2025, the automatic motor fuel tax rate increases that are based on annual growth in the Consumer Price Index. It would repeal that. It's been in place since 2013. So it's led to us having one of the highest gas taxes in the country. Number two, it would prohibit the state or a local jurisdiction from imposing or levying a vehicle miles traveled tax or similar fee using GPS tracking of vehicles. And number three, it would require that the Maryland Transit Administration recover, phased in through 2029, a mandated percentage of operating cost for services through farebox. Again, phased into fiscal year 2029. So just very quickly, I'll get into the details. Many of you know, of course, that the Transportation Infrastructure Act of 2013 requires the comptroller to announce an annual motor fuel tax rate increase, which is indexed to CPI every year. And July 1st of every year, it rises. It can never go down. It can only increase. And there's no cap on the increase. This year, after July 1st of this year, we now have the sales tax. Gas tax accounts for 47 cents per gallon on the average of every gallon of gas sold in the state. Many Marylanders, with the current inflationary climate, are already struggling with the high price of gas, groceries, rent, and other essentials. This would repeal it and allow us to make a determination as a General Assembly about what the rate ought to be every year when we come back into session and be able to take a vote on that. Number two, we all understand that the introduction and the incentivization to have hybrid and electric vehicles has caused us to have more and more electric vehicles, and also that's not a bad thing necessarily at all. But we do know that electric vehicles and hybrid vehicles, of course, also it's a challenge figuring out how to handle that. But one of the areas that folks have been discussing, and it's been discussed here even in Maryland over the last several years, an alternative to gas tax would be a per mile traveled tax. There's a number of concerns associated with the state tracking where our constituents are driving and where they go. The Fourth Amendment of the United States Constitution guarantees a right to privacy from unwarranted government intervention. So in order for the state to tax citizens per mile, the state would have to track their mileage. The other thing is a lot of times this is considered as an alternative, but we know that the way it's been presented in Maryland is that it might very well be on top of a gas tax. So it's a concern. It could be really would be a commuter tax on many of those who can least afford it, which is working poor and middle class folks in outlying areas. And then finally, so this bill would say that we cannot have a miles traveled tax using GPS tracking to track folks' miles. And then third, this bill deals with farebox recovery, which has fallen to pretty dismal levels in our state, unfortunately. Prior to fiscal year 2018, the Maryland Transit Administration was required to recover at least 35% of total operating costs for bus, light rail, and metro subway services throughout the state, and all passenger railroad services. State law further required MTA to set fare prices and collect other operating revenues in an amount sufficient to achieve this level of 35% farebox recovery. That was repealed after 2018. In FY22, MTA bus, light rail, and commuter rail operating costs achieved a farebox recovery of 7%, 6%, 8%, and 8% respectively. So we're now under 10% farebox recovery. This disparity shows, and it's attached, I've submitted it with my testimony, you'll see the vast amount of subsidy that Maryland drivers are paying for public transportation. It was already a high amount of subsidization, but since 2021, it's really jumped. and if you look at the chart, we're at a point now where the Transportation Trust Fund, about 50% of it is going to mass transit versus about 25% of it going to highway and bridge spending. So gas tax dollars are excessively subsidizing transit to a level where we've got, as I said, a fare box recovery of under 10% on average. So this bill would return that to gradually return that to a 35% fare box recovery requirement by 2029. It phases it in modestly, starting with 15% in FY25 and rising 5% each year until it reaches 35% in FY 2029. So in summary, one of my big priorities down here, and I think all of us are concerned about the cost of living that our constituents are facing in so many ways. And there's some things that we, of course, can do and some things we can't do. We can't necessarily battle nationwide inflation with our actions completely, but this legislation would allow for some relief. It would put more responsibility on these very large transit systems where only a small percentage of our commuters use them to have a little bit less of a subsidization. Still heavily subsidized, but less so. And it would also protect privacy for our Maryland drivers. So I'd respectfully request a favorable report on Senate Bill 841, and happy to answer any questions.